Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and welcome to MoMI from Home, Getting in Good Trouble. So I'm Tiffany Joy, an educator and guest curator at MoMI, and in honor of the late congressman and civil rights activist John Lewis, and in conjunction with the powerful documentary John Lewis, Good Trouble, which is available via MoMI's virtual cinema. We are here to talk about good trouble and political organizing. And here with me tonight are Tiffany Brown and Antoinette Gregg, organizers and co-hosts of Protest Baes, a podcast centering on Black sisterhood. So welcome, Tiffany Brown and Antoinette Gregg. So thanks for coming. And so tell us a little bit about Protest Baes.
So Protest Baes is a podcast that we started about 2 years ago, I believe, Antoinette. Yeah, 2 years ago. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. We started about 2 years ago, and it's focusing on Black women and non-binary, like queer, femme, and all that, who are living in New York City. And we talk about different social justice issues, protesting, organizing, random, pop culture things of the such. But it started because Antoinette and I started protesting together back in like 2015 with Eric Gardner. And if you know anything about protesting, you know that you should have a buddy or a comrade or someone with you, just to make sure, in case you get arrested, that someone knows that you are accounted for. So, and I think at the time, bae was like a really popular term. So that's how Protest Baes came into fruition. I don't know, maybe we might update the name, but
It's still a popular name. Yeah,
so that's how Protest Baes came to be.
Awesome. Thanks, Tiffany. Angela, did you want to say anything?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. Like, we were just out here in these streets and, Tiffany and I had worked together at the time. So like, we would just like kind of like, hustle off from work and like go and like do all this, shutting down of things and, going to rallies and everything. And then we decided like, what, might as well like, talk about some, issues that we face and some of the stuff that we do just to kind of get out there and have a dialogue with people like us and people who want to be more educated and how to do activism and things like that. So yeah.
And I also think we really tried to highlight just like ordinary voices because, I feel like you see a lot of, people who are in the front who are like on CNN and MSNBC, but I think we really kind of represent like the regular girls who are politically in tuned and astute and have some sort of political theory of their own and, just kind of operate in this system and, how we view things and what we think can lead us to freedom and liberation.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. And we'll talk more about, our your organizing experience too. And it definitely connects to Good Trouble. So that's what we're going to talk about first. Is we're going to show a bunch of clips tonight, 3 clips, and the first clip is of John Lewis and his legendary speech on Good Trouble, and then we'll chat a little bit about it.
I would see those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. And I would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents why. They would say, boy, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. But in 1955, 15 years old, the action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Dr. King inspired me to get in trouble, what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. It's time for all good people in this state, here in Dallas, to get in trouble. I got arrested a few times during the 60s. 40 times. And since I've been in Congress, another 5 times. And I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. But my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
So that was John Lewis's speech on Good Trouble, and when he repeatedly talked about good trouble and getting into good trouble, necessary trouble, since John Lewis was arrested a couple times because of protesting. And so yeah, Tiffany and Antoinette, you can share what does good trouble mean to you, and how have you gotten into good trouble?
So I guess like when I hear like kind of that phrase good trouble, I think obvious, like I say it's obvious, but maybe it's not, I don't know. I think it means that like, you know, being antagonistic and being kind of like in trouble for like a good cause or a good reason or for a good purpose, right? A lot of people always say that like, especially when it comes to kind of like racial injustice and you know, the plight of Black Americans, just like, you know, it's like just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's right, you know, or just because something is done a certain way doesn't mean that it should continue to go that way. So if you think about like Nat Turner or Harriet Tubman during slavery, right? Slavery was legal, right? Like, but it wasn't a good thing. So like them going against slavery and like doing the things in which they did, you know, to revolt and go against that was technically like getting in trouble and doing illegal things, but it was for a good cause. So I think anytime I hear that, like I just kind of think of like, you know, there are things within society that, you know, are broken and need to be fixed and might be legal or might be something that's been, you know, systemic. But if you're, you know, out here trying to change those like terrible things, then you be getting into trouble. You know, you might get arrested, you know, you might get, you know, whatever else, but it's still for a good purpose.
Definitely agree with everything that Antoinette said. I'll also say that for me, good trouble is not necessarily trouble, because I feel like we operate under a system that is just oppressive. And just like Antoinette said, just because the laws are on the books and they're, you know, on the books doesn't mean they're right. And I think I kind of couple good trouble with like righteous anger. And oftentimes when I was out protesting, just as recently when they had like the curfew, I didn't look at that as a form of trouble or me getting into good trouble, because I was like, this curfew shouldn't even exist to begin with. Like, we should not have a curfew, you know, that's prohibiting from us exercising our First Amendment rights, especially when we are protesting and, you know, calling for, demanding for, you know, justice when it comes to state sanctioned violence against Black and Brown communities. So obviously, like the term good trouble, you know, you think of John Lewis and everything that he does for like the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, but I also want us to be cautious of when we look at like what good trouble is, because I think that can also pigeonhole people. Like, okay, good trouble is what John Lewis did, but some people may not think that good trouble is looting or burning down a building or, you know, saying, yelling out FTP. So I think we just need to be like cognizant of like, okay, what's good trouble, and not try to be like the gatekeepers of what good trouble is, especially when we are dealing with oppressed and marginalized communities.
Yeah, definitely. There's different ways that we could get into trouble. Do you want to explain like how have you gotten into good trouble? And um and I was just thinking specifically if you want to talk about it, like what your examples of it have been.
Well, I think when you just talk about kind of like, you know, Protest Baes, like what me and Tiffany have done, like we've done a lot of like rallies, as you know, I said earlier, we've done a lot of protests, we've done marches, sit-ins, different things like that, that kind of bring attention to different types of injustice. Like a lot of it was like police brutality, but also like we've done stuff about, like against affordability for education or like the environment, like things like that. So I think definitely kind of like disrupting the normal flow of business in the city, and yeah, just kind of being very intentional about the way in which we protest is the biggest example of us doing something like that.
I would say the most recent thing I did was in terms of getting them into good trouble is another comrade and I, we shut down Manhattan Bridge with a bunch of organizers. And that was at the height of the George Floyd protest that we started at at the Barclays Center. And then we marched over to the Manhattan Bridge. And obviously there was a wall of cops and, the zip ties and shields and, riot gear essentially. And they blocked us one way, but we still made it onto the bridge, but we were met by another wall of cops. But, something as simple as stopping the flow of traffic and, inconveniencing people, while they're living their everyday lives in ways that, Black and brown people can't live their everyday lives. I think that was a form of my most recent forms of big trouble. Also, I said, breaking the quote unquote curfew that was imposed by Governor Cuomo. And then also Antoinette and I did some actions, I think, out in Staten Island. I think Antoinette was out in Staten Island. And then we also did some actions outside of Gracie Mansion, Times Square, just around police brutality and just also elevating the different unjust killings of Black and brown bodies.
Yeah. And even something as simple as a calling campaign for to kind of investigate the killing of Breonna Taylor and having everyone kind of just harangue, that's the state and the DA and everybody to be what's really going on, it's kind of a more simple one because I guess people a lot of times gravitate towards just you kind of those huge protests, but there's smaller things that also are kind of disruptive in a way. And as big as Minnesota and the kind of uprising that happened there, or the uprising in Ferguson or Baltimore or any of these other cities against killing of Black people.
Yeah, and a lot of protesters have been getting arrested too recently, and that's also an example that I think of with John Lewis and his early activism. Is he was arrested and for dissidents and for the protest he did. Have you ever been arrested for while protesting?
Yes. That's a simple question. Yes, I've been arrested. It's interesting though, because and then I guess to go back to good trouble, it's when you think about the fact that it's oh my God, I got, handcuffed, they took my little pedigree or whatever, my fingerprints and stuff, and then you had to stay, I feel like it's a little anxiety, it's anxiety because oh my God, I'm about to be in this cell, da, da, da. But then when you think about it, you're you know what, forget that, because it's I'm out here for a purpose and a reason, and it's you can go ahead and lock me up, but I'm still upset and I'm still mad, and I still did this for the purpose of getting through to you that this is not okay, that you keep killing people, So yeah, I think it was a little scary, but then it's after the first time, it's just whatever.
Yeah, definitely. I think Antoinette and I got arrested outside of Gracie Mansion together. Mm-hmm. And that was for Eric Garner. I think that was when the non-indictment verdict came out of Officer Pantaleo, who 6 years later, he now was fired from the police force. But then it was also one time that Antoinette and I she got arrested outside by Times Square, which was so random because in the split, it was a matter of 10 to 15 seconds. And I turned around and I see her in handcuffs. I was oh, okay. There she goes.
Yeah, no, life comes at you fast, when you're protesting in the streets. But it's I think that's the whole purpose of it. Because, because it's John Lewis and a lot of people of that kind of revolutionary cohort got arrested numerous times, for the different types of civil disobedience stuff that they've done. And even thinking about that, more than that, if you think of somebody like Angela Davis, she was in prison, think of Assata Shakur, think of Malcolm X, so many people were in jail for extended periods of time. Malcolm X was in jail for other things, but
Malcolm X was.
Yeah, no, he was in jail for other things, but I'm saying there's been extended period of time. Even when you come to think about like Nelson Mandela or somebody like that, you know, it's like you've been in jail for years for like these very political reasons, but it's like that doesn't necessarily like say anything about like your character, right? It's about the system that like is trying to punish your character, punish your actions when they, you know, it's like when it's not necessarily something that's wrong. So that's why it's like I had to really like get over the whole like jail thing. I mean, I was over it like fairly quickly because like after I feel like after like the first kind of like hour you're in there, you're just like, okay. And then there's so many other people in there too, and it's like, you know, it's like it shows you the kind of brokenness of like, you know, the system in which it's like they will put you and like all these other people, you know, especially like this time around, there was like hundreds and hundreds of people that they were just like locking up because they just didn't want people protesting, you know? And it's just kind of like, does that make sense to you? Like to just, you know, put all these people in here and then going as far as to say like, you know what, I know traditionally we've let you out within like 24 hours, but now, no, we're just gonna like, you know, tack on some kind of thing and just forget habeas corpus and just be like, oh, we're just gonna leave you in here because we don't want you back on the street because we don't necessarily have enough like police to like police you as you protest, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just been.
Yeah, you saw that also during this, I would say this wave of protests that people were in there longer, and it also in other states, especially where Breonna Taylor was killed, like, you know, they were charging them with like felonies and misdemeanors, which is like, if you're a protester or organizer, you view that as like trumped up charges. But also when they do that, it's also a way for like an intimidation tactic. Because I know in New York City, if you get arrested, you can't get in trouble within the next like 6 months, and then it's kind of like drops off your record. So
yeah.
But then, you know, they also started taking those cases to trial in some instances, especially like a lot of the organizers that were part of like NYC shut it down, things of that nature. So like they use those sort of intimidation tactics to get people off the street, even though we will not be on the street if y'all just stop killing us.
Exactly.
You know? So yeah.
Definitely. Thank you for that. I think we're going to also remind everyone who's watching through YouTube or through Zoom, if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat and we'll answer them later in the conversation. So we're going to look, this is about the March on Washington. So this is a clip of John Lewis and his speech during the March on Washington. And then we'll talk a little bit about documenting protests, archiving social movements, and afterward. So yeah, this is a clip of John Lewis' speech on March on Washington.
Let us not forget that we are involved in a serious social revolution where is a political party that will make it unnecessary to march on Washington. Where is the political party that will make it unnecessary to march in the streets of Birmingham? Those who have said be patient and wait, we must say that we cannot be patient. If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, we will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. But we will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today. We must say, wake up, America, wake up, for we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient.
So yeah, the question I have about this clip is, how does documenting protests like the March on Washington and archiving social movements like the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s activate future generations to be socially engaged with their communities? And so specifically this image of John Lewis in his speech and other images of social movements, even now, you know, documenting social movements that are happening now, later generations. What do you think? How does that? How do you think this is gonna activate future generations? Tiffany, you want to go first? Tiffany Brown.
I think it's important to document the civil rights movement. You know, what happened in the 50s and 60s is important to document what's happening right now. So I think we could just have put things in perspective and context. I think a lot of times future generations think you have to like reinvent the wheel. Like, police brutality is not new. It's just, you know, in a different fashion. You know, they were killing us and beating us during Jim Crow, back during slavery, and they're still doing it now in 2020, unfortunately. But I think it goes to show you, I hope it will show you that some sort of incremental progress has been made, where the mistakes may have happened, how can we grow from this mistake and we can learn. You know, a lot of those people, you know, unfortunately, they're not around. I think John Lewis was the last of the four that were there that has passed away right before another, I think it was like C.L.T. Davis. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, but they died like within a day of each other. But we also have to recognize that we still have like Assata Shakur, we still have Nikki Giovanni, you know, we still have Angela Davis, we still have Nikki Giovanni. I would hope that Assata Shakur is still alive, but we don't know because, you know, her situation, you know, she got to be on the ground. She just can't be out and about like that. But I think we really need to like look at our I would say forefathers and mothers and see what they did and see how we can grow with that and excel, because a lot of the same issues that they were fighting for, like civil rights, like the civil rights legislation that John Lewis fought tooth and nail for, and, you know, got his head cracked over a bridge for us. Yeah, Reverend C.T. Vivian. He also passed away like within a day of John Lewis. You know, they fought long and hard. We have to also see that what he fought for was gutted back in like 2015. So I think we really need to realize that, like, you know, this is going to be a long fight. I know Antoinette and I was talking how, like, you know, it's just like, this is just another stage of the battle, but it's the same war, essentially. So I think it's really important. And I also think it's important for Black and Brown people to tell their own stories, because we see how the oppressor can really romanticize people that they once hated. We look at that when we see MLK. We probably could see a little bit of that, how they do John Lewis. But I think it's really important for Black and Brown people to see their stories documented, and also from other Black and Brown creatives and artists, because I think it looks different, and I think it's more intentional, and because, you know, we live these lives and this is our lives, rather than, you know, someone else just there just to get some film credits.
Like Don Porter, who is the documentary filmmaker of Good Trouble, John Lewis Good Trouble. Did you want to
speak to that? But, you know, I'm just saying.
Yeah, did you want to add anything, Antoinette, about archiving social movements?
Yeah, I think the importance of kind of the archiving aspect of social movements is to learn, right? So like someone like me or someone like Tiffany, who are still like in movement spaces and like working towards like being a little bit more free, right? Like we're able to look and see like what they did and what they did that worked and what they did that, you know, may not have been as successful, so that we could, you know, go forth and like learn from their mistakes, you know, and build on the good things that they did do, so that we're able to, you know, like really like liberate ourselves, right? Because I feel like 50 years ago, you know, when Bloody Sunday happened and, you know, John Lewis and Martin and, you know, everybody else was like out there protesting, and even talking about when like Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, or like Angela Davis, or even the Black Panthers, who are kind of more radical in nature than a Martin or John Lewis. Like, even though they all had like, you know, different techniques and different types of actions that they did, like this, they still had the same vein of like freeing Black people and liberating Black people and having like a better way of life, you know, for us, you know. And I think even seeing that aspect of it helps a lot, because it shows you that it's like, there's no one way, you know, to get to that. And we learned different things from each one of them, that now it's like in our cohort, it's a hybrid of all those things. So we do social justice things, right? But we also are like, if we got to get a little rough, we might get a little rough too. You know what I'm saying? Like, because there's worthiness in like every single part of that, right? And Angela Davis been saying since before the beginning of like, all of this like abolitionist stuff that we're talking now, that like, we don't need to be here with this, like be here for these cops. You know what I'm saying? And like now that's a big push now to be like, oh, abolish the police, because people are now kind of like, it's unfolding more, and like people are seeing, I guess, like more of the different like layers of how like, police came to be, and about like, the statistics when it comes to like police brutality and the, differential treatment of Black people versus white people when it comes to cops and things like that. So it's like, I think like if they weren't archived, and if we weren't hearing their voices, like Tiffany said, like we would just keep doing the same things over and over. We would never see the nuances of the, like every time some type of movement or some type of thing comes around. And then, so like when something happens, like the Supreme Court striking down sections of the Voting Rights Act to say like, oh, we're post-racial. And then we see all of these different kind of like voting, like injustices happening again, it shows you that's like, these things are still needed. Because given any type of leeway, it's like they'll go into these communities and they'll like take away, some of the polling sites, and they'll make it harder for people to like have these different dialogues about like voting and like and different things like that. I mean, even like people weren't thinking like, if they don't get you from voting because, oh, you might be too young, or you don't know this, or you don't know that, or it's hard to get to the site, it's like, then lock them up. So then if you're a felon, then you can't vote, like there's a lot of like different kind of insidiousness that goes with any type of like institutional injustice that we think about, but we would never see those iterations and never kind of like dig deep into what the changing face of it is if we don't see that archival like footage or those images.
Yes, and speaking of, you were talking a little bit about like voting like issues. A lot of folks still have a lot of voting complications. They can't get to voting booths, and there's not enough locations in one's area, or they're told to go away. And so that's one of the issues, John Lewis fought for as a young activist, and that's an archival footage that I wanted to share. It's the voting rights demonstration that Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis were participating and organized. So yeah, we'll share that clip and then talk about it.
We must make it clear that we know when we are denied the right to vote.
Today represents a marvelous determination of this drive to register Negro voters in massive numbers in the state of Alabama.
You got 85 here this morning. 86. That's mighty good. Mighty good.
You did not follow my orders. You disobeyed the parade order. Each and every one in this line is under arrest for parading without a permit.
We will continue definitely to get large numbers of people registered.
So yeah, these are all clips again of John Lewis's Good Trouble documentary, directed by John Porter. And so the question I have for Antoinette and Tiffany is, what role do legislative policies play in the fight for justice, such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and also how does legislation feed into activism?
I guess I'll take it.
Sorry, I didn't.
It's cool. So for my work, I work for a public sector labor union. And we very much have to engage in legislation, electoral politics, and pushing for legislation that will provide more access and equity to the issue that I work on. And I think it goes hand in hand. You know, we need people that's like out on the street yelling, protesting, and making sure that we're bringing an issue like police brutality aware to the forefront, to make sure that this issue is not just going away, that it's not going to be another, just another Black person that's going to get shot down, and then, you know, they'll just provide us with murals and that be it. I think what's so different about these uprisings is that, one, Minnesota, you know, they do dislike the police enough for me, and they made it known. And I think we saw a shift because for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, this man, you know, laid on the ground and cried out for his mama that was no longer living, which was an unfortunate event. And then we saw Governor Cuomo a few weeks later pass, you know, the 58A bill. And we also saw how a police officer that used a chokehold out in Far Rockaway was then arrested for using said chokehold. We also see how now police records have been released in the NYPD, and I think 1 in 10 police officers have police misconduct, you know, allegations against them. So I do think you see what's happening in the street is definitely pushing legislation, because now you can't ignore legislation that say that you have to reveal a cop's or a law enforcement's police record. The same way we knew that Eric Garner allegedly was selling Lucy cigarettes, we should know that this said cop, Brian Benjamin, whatever his name may be, he has 15 police allegations. So what sort of cop can he possibly be, and what sort of harm is he inflicting on the community as well? So I think it kind of shows some sort of, you know, like fairness when we're doing these sort of investigations. So I think legislation and activism is tandem, it's not one or the other. I do think, you know, this sort of legislation needs to have more teeth to it and has to make sure that we're actually holding law enforcement, you know, more accountable, because, you know, we can't just have the police department in charge of their own accountability, because we see what that could potentially look like. There's no real accountability there. But I definitely think those two go hand in hand, and we need, you know, the people and the activists and the organizers galvanizing people, getting people to go into action so we can hold our elected officials accountable. More often than not, elected officials swear they don't hear from their constituents. They don't know that this is an issue, so they don't act. So I think that's why we need people on the ground in communities, making sure that you are telling, you know, the constituent or a voter or someone who's just a concerned citizen that, no, you need to call your assembly person, your council member, your senator, because we need him to do X, Y, and Z. I think there needs to be more engagement in that way. And then we will see more legislation, because like 50A was not a new bill. 50A was sitting around for years. As soon as Eric Garner passed away, his mother, Gwendolyn Carr, was pushing for that bill for years. A lot of these laws that we're seeing being passed now, they're not new. They, you know, like Governor Cuomo didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I want to pass a bill. These were bills that have been pushed by organizations, you know, mothers of the movement for years. But, you know, sometimes the right sort of combination of events happen that, you know, can really push legislation over the finish line.
And Antoinette, do you want to add on?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that on the one hand, it's like like I think enforcement of laws is basically like the most important part of when you think of legislation, because like Tiffany said, like a lot of that legislation has already been here. Most of it actually has already been on the books. It's just a matter of people actually knowing that, right? So like being able to educate the public in a very active way, and then also like activating them into action to make sure that like these legislators and politicians or whoever else is actually enforcing those things, so that people in the community can get the things that they need, or make sure that they're like, you know, actually punishing people in the way that they should be punished, especially like when it comes to like police brutality and holding cops accountable. It's very important. And like recently, people have been talking about the laws on the books that like exempt cops from exempt people from being able to like, you know, show like their history of like, you know, from one place to the other, right? But it's like, if you're a doctor, right? Or if you're a nurse or something like that, and you have a malpractice suit against you, that's on your record, and any place else that you go, they can see that, and they have to be, you know, and they're able to like, you're able to say like, oh yes, you know, it's like, you can have the shop, or no, you can't, because you have like this marred record, right? So it's like, if other public servants, right, like quote unquote public servants, like already have these type of distinctions, like why is our police officers exempt from this? You know, like it's the same thing. So it's like, I think when you have like these laws on the books that aren't necessarily like helping anybody, or you have these laws that could help people and they just need to know it, it's like, I think that's where activism kind of like bridges the juncture between that legislation and actually like getting things done.
I would just also add one more thing. I think the difference is what we're seeing is the type of elected officials that we are electing. And I think it was June 23rd, we just had a primary in New York State, and a lot of Democratic Socialists of the AOC cohort, per se, were, you know, elected, like Jamal Bowman in the Bronx, Killer Anderson in Queens, Jabari Brisport out in Brooklyn, Farah also out from Brooklyn. So I think we also have to elect different sort of leaders who are, you know, talking about dismantling and defunding the police, who are talking about, you know, socialistic like ideas, because I think that will also kind of push the old guard of elected officials and politicians. Either they're going to have to, you know, get out of office or get on board. So I think we need some more elected leaders that are, you know, not scared to not pass a budget if it doesn't include, you know, just defunding the police. We just saw City Council pass a budget that did not defund the police, and that was the same budget that barely wanted to add additional funding to summer youth programs, barely wanted to add any money to educational programs. But that same City Council also passed a budget, passed a law that will create 4 new jails. So we also have to look at the type of elected leaders that we have in office and making sure that they are being held accountable to the people. And more often than not, because of voting right sabotage and just low voter turnout in New York, such a progressive state, we have a significantly low voter turnout. And I think that is why also a lot of our elected leaders, they don't have to, you know, be tied to the people. They could be tied to labor unions. They could be tied to special interest groups and advocacy groups, but they're not tied to like the greater good of their own constituency. And that is why we need to either get them out of office, hold them accountable in a real way, or find someone like a Khalil Anderson from Far Rockaway, who's going to be the youngest person in the assembly, who was really able to galvanize the people in Far Rockaway and even out of his district and communities that were, you know, not even close to Far Rockaway. So I think we need more elected leaders like that, who are really to say like, enough is enough. I'm going to be a true change agent, a true transformational change agent, and bring some real change to the system that has continually oppressed Black and Brown communities.
Thank you. Yes, I also agree that there's a low voting turnout, and everyone vote. Vote. That's important. So I guess I do have a couple more questions. Oh, okay, we do have a question from the audience. I'm going to go first with the questions asked by registered guests. A couple of those, and then we'll take the new questions from folks that are watching now. So how do you get involved in community organizing? That was one of the questions we had for folks. Yep, Tiffany Brown.
So it's like how are they able to get into it, or how did we get into it?
Both. I think there a lot of folks are wondering how they get into community organizing. So once you know, say how you've gotten into community organizing, you can also maybe give some advice of how folks can stay active now.
Yeah, well, I got into community organizing through a job. So yeah, because like
with job Nyberg.
Yeah, through Nyberg, because like
all day.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. Like this whole like very, I'll say, progressive way of kind of like speaking to issues just isn't a thing. So coming to New York and kind of like finding out about like this organization and being able to kind of like talk face to face with people and then knocking on doors and talking to people, like it was a whole kind of new way of, I guess, like engaging in issues that I was not like aware of. So through that, I was able to kind of like find out about different like organizations or like different events happening about different issues, and I was able to kind of dive into it. Now it's like my Facebook has like all these events. You can Google it, like you can literally Google whatever like political issue you want to join into and put like organizations or nonprofits in whatever part of the state or country you're in, and it will pull up so many different things that you can do. You can find their Facebooks, you can find their Instagrams or whatever, and that's like a easy way to get involved. A lot of places have kind of like general interest meetings if you want to be within an organization, things like that. So yeah, it's just about like you just have to like take the leap to get your foot in the door, and go from there.
I think I was born saying fight the power. I'd be like protesting everybody, parents, everybody could get a protest from me. But I think my first involvement or my first like political awakening or consciousness was when Sean Bell died. I think that was like in 2006, and I was a freshman in college. So of course we had like a string of like police brutality cases that were happening, but for some reason like that just really stuck to me because Sean Bell is from Southeast Queens, not too far from where I live, and I remember saying like I need to go out there and protest. I need to just get out there. And at the time I majored in political science and urban studies. That's what I got my degree in, with the concentration in law and politics. So like I said, since I was a young child, I was going to be a lawyer. I am not a lawyer yet, but wait on it. But I just think I always just had like a sense of just like justice and unfairness. So I just either was like, I'm going to work in some sort of advocacy world, or I'm going to run for office of some degree. And my first, I would say, job per se was an internship with NYPIRG. So I interned with NYPIRG. And then once I graduated, I was working for a law firm, and I was like, "Ooh, y'all racist here." So I'm going to have to get a job that I actually went to school for. So I started working with NYPIRG as a project coordinator. And then I became the statewide higher education organizer. And I was with NYPIRG, I would say maybe about 4 years. And NYPIRG really gave me like the fundamentals of what it is to be an organizer / activist in New York State. Like New York State politics is very just convoluted and full of ups and downs with state budget and city budget, and it's its own soap opera in itself, and the main character is Governor Cuomo. So I think that was my introduction, but I think that's like, I don't want to say like my professional politics. I'm very passionate about higher education, but I would say some groups that you could probably get involved in that are really active, that were a part of like like even Occupy City Hall. I think it's like the Free Black Radicals that you could get involved in. Vocal New York, which does a lot of great work for like people who were formerly incarcerated, homeless, or who were or either, I want to say homeless, unhoused, or like for like drug abusers. Also, there's groups like Citizen Action that you could get involved with, NYPIRG that you can get involved with. There's a group Until Freedom. There's also a lot of like, violence interrupter groups that are, in Black and Brown communities that are trying to be the bridge to make sure that we don't need police in our own communities. So, you have like groups like Erica Ford. Oh my gosh, it's escaping me right now, but I'm gonna remember. Or you even have like groups like Gangsters Making Astronomical Change, which I love that name because it's just like,
wow, that's a great name.
We are making astronomical change, and I just think that's such a great name. But it's run by this brother named Shan Duke, and he was formerly incarcerated. And I think those groups matter, because I think everyone plays a role, and also I would tell people, like, you don't need to start your own nonprofit. I know everyone wants to start their own nonprofit and like be a face or a brand, but like, I don't think Black and brown people, like, this shouldn't be our life. I don't think we have to like fight for our humanity. So I think we need to just add on to groups that exist because they need volunteers, they need money, and they need people who are from the community. And the simplest thing that you can do when you're trying to get your feet wet is go to your community board meeting. See who the players are, because those people are the ones who be peeking out the window when something's afoot and they be ready to call the cops. Those are the ones who are actively engaged in the community. And that's where you'll see your elected officials or a rep from the elected officials office. So go to your community board. It's very easy to find out who your community, like I'm a part of Community Board 13. That's one of the most active community boards, I believe, in Southeast Queens, and it's a very large community board. So go to your community board because that's just like a base level. And if you want to be on your community board, because your community board has a lot of impact on like land use, different sort of organizations and businesses that can even come into your community, you know. So I think just engaging with your community board, and that may sound like, oh, everyone says that, but like everyone's not doing it. And then everyone gets surprised when they see a 50-foot, you know, high rise in their neighborhood. So
no, you learn a lot from those meetings.
Yeah. So like the community board is like, that's when you know what's what in your community and how you can engage with it or stop it. And more often than not, that's where your elected leaders, you know, show up. Like everyone goes to a community board meeting. It's like community. So like be invested in your community. So that's a baseline level thing that you can do. And, you know, obviously registering to vote and engaging. I think a lot of people just push a lever or mailing their ballot because this is still a pandemic world. But, you know, really looking at who's running for office, why they're understanding the issues. But I would just say community board.
Yeah. And also, like, don't be afraid to, like, call your legislators, like, from local to state to whatever. Like, because that's what they're there for. Like, even if you're calling your legislator for something that you think is, like, a question you shouldn't, like, ask legislator, no, that's what they're there for.
Like, something simple as, like, a tree falling in your...
Yeah.
Like, that is under their wheelhouse, and they will make sure that tree gets removed.
Yeah.
Like basic things, you know, it's not necessarily rocket science, but it's just the fact that we don't always have, like, the access or the tools to understanding like what's available to us.
Yeah, and people feel like, oh, like because they're like this lowly citizen, right? Like they're far removed from their legislators. No, they're people just like you, and they have their job literally is to make sure that when things go awry in your community and your surroundings, that it's fixed. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, that's so amazing. That's an amazing list. I wish I had the links for all the organizations you mentioned, but maybe we can link them later. So yeah, I'll take 2 more questions, and I'll ask the one someone who's watching right now has, and it says, do you think documentaries like Good Trouble can lead to radicalizing people so that they become part of the movement?
I think that documentaries can inform. I don't necessarily think that documentaries can radicalize someone, like, because I think there's more to someone developing an opinion and kind of like leaning to a certain part of what you're doing than watching a documentary. Yeah, I think that's the shortest. Like that's my short answer.
I think. Yeah, same. I think documentaries can inform you, and it could possibly lead to radicalization if you are continuously seeking knowledge. You know, like we know tons of documentaries that, like, you see a documentary, it's like, oh, I'm going to be a vegetarian now because this is terrible.
Yes.
The way they treat, you know, chickens and stuff like that. So I definitely think documentaries can, you know, propel you to act or just be more informed around an issue and, you know, help you take the necessary steps to enter into the movement and be a part of the movement. I definitely think they serve a purpose. I'm not sure if you're saying like radicalize in a negative or positive way, but I definitely think documentaries can inform you, and that information can be the steps that you take to the next point of your journey.
Yeah, read, everyone, read more too, and watch documentaries. but reading's also important. But so I'll just ask one more question. We have 6 more minutes. So how does one unite all the groups organizing into one effort, for example, one big day of solidarity? This is one of the questions that was asked by a registered guest. So what do you think, Antoinette?
I think it's very hard to, because I think maybe because the question's very like non-specific, but I feel like it's very hard to organize everybody. Like, I don't know how you would do that, but I think if you want to be able to get a large group of people together for a certain issue or something, it requires a lot of coordination across different like organizations, different kinds of people, different like levels of administration. I mean, and depending on what type of like gathering you want, or like, you know, what your aim is through it, like it's about coordination, to like be very like specific, because so much goes into like having some type of thing. So like if you were putting on a rally, say, about a certain issue and you wanted it to be outside at a certain spot, it's like you have to figure out like, okay, what type of people did you want out there? Like, who do you want speaking at this rally? Like, what types of people are you aiming this at? You know, like what other organizations could help you bring more people in? What type of, you know, even social media, like what type of social media presence, like, should I have out there to get more people out? Yeah, it's like, because without any type of coordination, it's like you're dead in the water. Like, there's no way to get like a host of people out to anything without coordinating with other people and getting other people to come to that place, especially surrounding like a one specific issue. You would have to know, like, you know, organizations that first align with like kind of like what the message you're trying to get out, but then also you should know like people and organizations that can get other people out who may not necessarily know how they feel about an issue, but are able to kind of like get people to come in order to like hear about it and kind of like keep an open mind about
it. Everything that Antoinette said, I will also say that when it comes to solidarity, I think we just have to understand that whatever the issue is, who is the most marginalized and impacted by said issue, and making sure that we are elevating those persons. I think sometimes people feel like, oh, when you like highlight, you know, certain people within a group, it could be like divisive. It's like, no, like when people say like Black trans lives matter, like they do matter, because trans people are getting killed by police as well, and they're also getting killed by other people in the community as well. So these are the most marginalized people that when we're saying like Black Lives Matter, we're saying all Black lives matter. So I think the solidarity just has to be recognized in a way that's like, okay, who is the most marginalized people on this issue, and how can I elevate their issues? So like sometimes even like something, just to pivot away from police brutality, environmental justice. Who's the face of environmental justice? Some white person named Karen that lives in Westchester that wants you to hug trees and polar bears and stuff like that. Like, but let's keep it real. When we talk about environmental justice, everyone likes to talk about in the Bronx how they have high asthma rates. You know, like that's environmental. Those are the most marginalized people, Black and Brown people that live in the Bronx. Like that's how environmental justice impacts them, because they have roadways and highways that go all through their communities. They have a disproportionate amount of infrastructure that, you know, has a bunch of pollutants, and like bus depots and trash depots and things of that nature that you may not see in Karen's neighborhood in Upper West Side or in Westchester. So I think that's why I'm saying, like, we need to recognize like who's the most marginalized people across any issue, and more often than not, it's Black and brown people. And if anything, I know we haven't mentioned COVID, but I think COVID really exposed that. In terms of even just like basic technology, how we saw that some kids didn't even have a laptop or a community or a computer in their home, or just access to this basic infrastructure to continue the education. So I think we need to understand like who's the most marginalized people and how could we build solidarity around them. And more often than not, it's Black and brown and indigenous folks.
No, that's a fact. I echo that.
Period.
And Rona is real, y'all.
Yeah.
Oh yes, the coronavirus.
Everybody knows when you wear a mask.
Yes.
Wash your hands, everyone. And sanitize everything.
Right.
And
every single issue that Black and brown folks have had have only been exacerbated by the fact that there's a pandemic. Healthcare, poverty, like education, the specific necessities that people need, and like we talk about activism and stuff like that, but like every single issue that like we are activating and talking about is subsumed within like COVID-19. So like it's very important to even understand the nuances of that.
It ain't nobody free until Black people are free. So
yes.
True. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tiffany Brown and Antoinette Gregg of Protest Baes. Where can we find Protest Baes?
So Protest Baes are on all major platforms. We just released a new episode today. It's titled Black Women, We Got Us. So you can listen to that on Apple, Spotify, any major platforms that you stream or listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram, and you can follow me on Instagram at TiffLizB. And also I'm on Twitter as well, where you can get, my political ramblings and also random stuff that I like to retweet or just say.
Yeah, and you can find me on Instagram at Antoinette. And then I'm also on Facebook, but I don't know if I'm a friend you.
But I don't be on Facebook. So don't.
Yeah, I also have Twitter, also Antoinette, but I'm on there a little bit less. I go on there just like kind of subject-based stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you can find Protest Baes on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Yes. Yeah. And go listen to the new episode.
Go listen.
Yes, please listen. And also want to remind folks that John Lewis Good Trouble is on our virtual cinemas. And we'll also be screening John Lewis Good Trouble at our Queens Drive-In. So stay tuned for more of that. And we have a summer media camp that's happening still. So, and teen media courses, mockumentary teen media course next week, and a filmmaking camp next week. And so, and we will be posting some links in the YouTube chat. Thanks, Leo. And thank you everyone who made this possible. All of the folks at MoMI, and everyone watching tonight. Thank you so much for coming. And
thank you for having us.
Oh, yay. You're welcome. Take care. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.